Welcome, and we'll join in the bracha. And please, I'll remind you, any comments, any thoughts, please know, just welcome them. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And, yeah, there we are. You should be able to see the screen. All right. So lovely passage we have here. Vatotse haaretz desha. So remember, God gives the earth the command to bring forth grasses and trees, fruit trees, etc. And it says that the land brought forth herbs, grasses, etc. Rav Assi, Rav Assi Rami. Okay, so Rami means that when you take two texts or two statements that appear to contradict each other. So Rami means sort of to throw up one text against another text. So it's Rav Assi who we're talking about. He is a late Amora. He's a teacher of the Talmud, of the Gemara, as opposed to the Mishnah. And this is what he said. So, Bitlat b'Shabta, on the third day of the week, Ketiv, it says, ותוצא הארץ דשא, it says, and the earth brought forth grasses. Uketiv b'shishi b'Shabbat, but on the sixth day of Shabbat, and he's referring now to chapter 2, verse 5 of Genesis. And it's assuming that what is, since it's talked about the creation of man, and man was created on the sixth day, and it's in that context, it says, so that's why he's saying it's the sixth day. V'chol siach hasadeh terem yeh ba'aretz. It says, and any sprout or any plant of the field before it was in the earth. So here we have we have here the third day, the grasses and the trees, but we have elsewhere, this is the contradiction, right? That on the sixth day it hadn't happened yet. It hadn't happened. Terem means it was before it happened, before they existed. So how do you find a compromise between these two verses? How do you harmonize them? Melamed. So this teaches you, Shiyatzu dishamim, that on that third day, the grasses sprouted, v'amdu al petach karka, but they only sprouted to the surface of the soil, right? The beginning of the land or of the earth. Ad sheba Adam. So they were there, they began and stopped right before they emerged from the earth. Ad sheba Adam harishon, until the first man came, ubikesh alehem rachamim, and he supplicated concerning them mercy. V'yardu geshamim, and at that point the rains came down, v'tzamchu, and then they sprouted. They came up. So what does this teach you? L'lamecha, to teach you, and this is, I think, a really profound statement he's going to make. Shehakadosh Baruch Hu, that the Holy One, blessed be He, mitaveh letfilatan shel tzadikim, He longs for the prayers of righteous people. And this image of the necessity of prayer, and that praying is actually, that it's such an amazing thing, that to pray is actually to try and fill a longing that God has. And it's important that he says tzadikim, right? That they have to be, that it's the prayer of righteous people that God longs for, meaning what goes on outside the prayer hall, what goes on outside, and the way one conducts one's life in general, and its relationship to that moment when we come before God is a direct one, and that it just catapults our prayers before God. So just a lovely thought here that this particular apparent contradiction actually comes to underscore the value of prayer. And I think that part of the reason for this statement is because it seems to me, and you're welcome to disagree, that people don't actually value prayer that much. And certainly, this is a supplication. It was praying on behalf of the grasses. And of course, without those grasses and without those trees, human beings, life itself couldn't survive on this planet for very long. And so in some ways, as one meditates on this particular little piece that we're doing here, um, there's some really profound considerations regarding our relationship to the rest of the world. That's in this specific case, plant life, and the importance and the significance of prayer, and the fact that human beings are capable of prayer. And, as we sort of enter this world of artificial intelligence, and that it's such a great looming issue for us, I wonder to myself, well, there's one thing I don't think, one thing artificial intelligence cannot do, and that is it can't pray. It can utter prayers. You can always have a mechanical prayer, but real prayer comes from the heart. And artificial intelligence does not have consciousness that I'm aware of or that one can show or prove. Okay, I suppose if you have a behaviorist approach to reality, well, clearly artificial intelligence is capable of behavior. But if you're saying that there's something called consciousness that actually exists, which is a deep mystery on many levels, then artificial intelligence does not appear to have consciousness. So I'm sure more can be said about that. So, Torah Temimah.
Rabbi,
Yes, yes, yes,
so God longs for us to
yes,
pray. Where,
yes, yes.
where does he, first of all, how do you say that in Hebrew?
Mitaveh, and I'm glad you asked me that. I translated it as longs for, but the word ta'ava, and I'm trying to think of how to, it's more than simply longing. To have a ta'ava is a lust. So actually, I should change this and say lusts. That is mitaveh, that God
And
lusts the prayer of the righteous. Go on.
where where does he get that idea, the rabbi who said it?
Well, there are other places too. I happen to know that, for example, one of the reasons that is given in the tradition as to why the matriarchs were barren, okay, is that God wanted them to pray for children and to have children. Go ahead, Judith.
I'm can't figure out how to get my hand down. Sorry.
Oh, okay, I can take care of that. Don't you worry. Okay,
Thank you.
okay. Um, I think that there's a lot to think about on that when it comes to the very purpose of existence and life, and what our purpose is in this world. I think it's saying a lot. And that idea of finding meaning in life in that relationship with the transcendent. I'm certainly not the first person to say such things, and clearly there are people who've said it far, far more articulately than I am right now. But this idea of even God creating human beings, right? Saying it from a transcendent point of view, that prayer is that moment when human beings try to connect with God. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing, is to try and connect with the deepest elements of our own existence. And also it occurred to me something else, that it goes back to that idea of appreciation, right? To to what great extent do we simply take for granted or feel entitled to so many things in our lives? And when it comes to the whole plant kingdom, right? how we just don't even think twice about it in terms of how the profound impact that it has on our lives. And that when I'm trying to put myself in the position that Rav Assi is talking about, and that human beings realize that first man, and of course we're speaking in a way metaphorically, realized that he needed it so badly, and that the only one who could make that possible would be the divine and the transcendent part of existence. But there are other places where there's indications and explanations as to how you could explain this. And from what we're reading right now, in some senses, it's saying, the Torah itself says that the plants didn't sprout yet because there was no human beings and there was no rain. And the idea of that rainfall and its relationship to our own existence as human beings. And I think, of course, in the Middle East and to some extent in California, because of our Mediterranean climate, the realization that if there's a lack of rain, there's suffering and famine that results. So, okay, I'm going to go here. Let's see what it says here, okay? So actually has a fairly brief but interesting statement to say here, an additional point. Below kashe mikan leman de amar be'eruvin. And this statement that we just read right now, I want to make sure I've got the right place. Yes, it is Mem Zayin. Leman de amar, to the person who holds. So there's an opinion being expressed in the Talmud, be'eruvin yudchet bet, on page 18b of Eruvin, that makes a statement, Adam Harishon Tziduki Haya, that the first man, that Adam, was a Sadducee, right? Well, we know some things about Sadducees. I believe they did not believe in immortality, apparently, right? They also took I believe, and I may be confusing with Sadducees and Karaites, but it does seem to me that Sadducees perhaps also denied the validity of the oral Torah, possibly as well. Okay, so here we go. The Sham Ira, and the reason why this is not a contradiction. Okay, if he was a Sadducee, and whatever goes along with Sadducee belief, right? That here he was praying for rain, etc., and that there's a value to prayer, and maybe all these things are issues for Sadducees. So why is this not a problem? Let's assume that Sadducees did not believe in the value of prayer. Desham Ire, because in Eruvin, it is talking about a situation. In other words, the statement that the first man was a Sadducee is discussing achar hachet. It is only after he had sinned. In other words, after he'd eaten for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Kafi shemevu'ar sham, as is actually explained there. De yalif kain, because he draws it out there, in other words, that he was a Sadducee, milashon ayeka. And the reason is because God says to Adam at that point, after he's done it, God says to him, where are you? Where are you standing? What's going on inside of you? The inyan amidat hadeshaim, and the issue regarding the fact that the grasses held up al petach karka, at the surface of the earth, hu shahayu tzmeim lemei geshamim, and the reason they were holding up there, and I love the way he expresses this. He says they were thirsty. Tzameh is thirsty. They were thirsty for the rainwater. Ki lo himtir Hashem, because up to that point, God had not caused rain to fall ad shenivra Adam b'yom hashishi, until Adam was created on the sixth day. So just a little further background regarding this is that there was basically dust. And what God did was he caused a sort of moisture to form He didn't cause it to rain. It wasn't rain, but caused some moisture to form in the earth that caused the earth to be moist. And from this moist combination of dust and water, God formed human beings. And again, I think you now know, and you have a sufficiently sophisticated sense of things to know that it's speaking in a deeply metaphoric kind of way. And it's making comments about the very nature and purpose of existence, of human existence, I should say. So yeah, just some interesting sort of almost mystical statements here now. So he goes on again. It says ותוצא פרי, and it says and trees that made fruit-bearing trees. So it just says fruit-bearing trees, but he says lerabot ilanei sarak. But when it says fruit-bearing trees, it really is including an ilan sarak refers to a non-fruit-bearing tree. So within Jewish consciousness, there is this division between fruit-bearing trees and non-fruit-bearing trees. It's a major distinction. So let's take a look here. Midayek, okay, he's looking very carefully, ma shebetzivui, regarding the command that God had given the earth at that point. That when God commands the earth to bring forth grasses and trees, etc., it states, ותוצא הארץ עץ פרי עושה פרי. It says, let the earth bring forth fruit trees, making fruit, capable of bearing fruit. Uvema'aseh, but when it came to what they did, Ketiv, it says, shehotzia eitz oseh pri, that it simply says that the earth brought forth trees that made fruit, as opposed to eitz pri, right? It just says eitz oseh pri, right? Going on, vidarish lerabot, and so he interprets this to include she'afilu h stam, that even just regular trees, asapri, that they also bore fruit, okay? V'haino, and that is to say, shegam ilanei sirak asu peirot, that at that initial time, trees that currently do not produce fruit, are not fruit-bearing, they also made fruit at the time. Uma shebe'emet asta haaretz, okay, and what in fact the land did, right, in fulfilling this command, yivuar lifanenu, the command, it's going to be clarified before us later on. The pasuk arura ha'adama ba'avurecha, when God says to Adam, okay, or to, I think this is Adam, okay, because also we know that when it came to Cain, the land was also cursed again, but that the land will be cursed on your account. Ye'u yanshan, check it out. Uveperush Rashi kan, and in the Rashi's explanation here. Uval Pnei Moshe, and the author of the work called Pnei Moshe, Kan Yerushalmi. So it's an interpretation of the Yerushalmi, of the Talmud Yerushalmi. What's tragic, of course, is that there is no Rashi for the Yerushalmi, because Rashi wrote this interpretation, or rather not even this explanation of the Babylonian Talmud, most of it, I mean, all but maybe one or two tractates. It totally opened up the ability to study Talmud, and there's no such interpretation. He just was a genius when it came to these explanations. So there are explanations of the Yerushalmi, but they do not have the quality of the Rashi interpretations of the Talmud Bavli. Okay, so Moshe, he Havin, okay, so the author of the Pnei Moshe in the Yerushalmi, Havin, he understood the Haperush that this interpretation, lerabot ilanei srak, that when he said that it came to include the non-fruit-bearing trees, shehotzia haaretz, which the earth brought forth, gam ilanei srak, he understood it to mean that in other words, it's sounding a little bit different, that he's understanding it to mean that even at that particular moment, the trees that were brought forth, along with the fruit-bearing trees, were the non-fruit-bearing trees. Upirush ze tamua ma'od. And he's saying, this interpretation is surprising. He's having a hard time understanding how the Pnei Moshe could say such a thing, because you see that we have statements that indicate that all the trees were fruit-bearing to begin with, and that only after Adam or Cain sinned, that's when some of them were no longer fruit-bearing. Shahared Rasha Ba'a, because this particular interpretation, that is to say, that trees became non-fruit-bearing, that some trees became non-fruit-bearing, Gam b'Midrash Rabbah kan, that the Midrash Rabbah also says this point, that initially all the trees were fruit-bearing, and it was only after human beings sinned that some of them stopped. Sof Parsha Hey, at the end of the chapter 5. V'sham piresh hamidrash Rabbah atzmo drasha zo v'zeh halashon, and here the Midrash Rabbah explains this particular interpretation in this manner. He's going to quote, Afilu ilane sarak asu perot. It says explicitly says that even the non-fruit-bearing trees actually produced fruit. But Tzarich Iyun, and he says this requires further investigation, how the Pnei Moshe could say what he said, that even from the beginning, along with the fruit trees, were created trees that did not bring fruit, because of course it doesn't seem to account for how the Torah states it. And this is a good place, I believe, for us to stop for today. Okay, so we will take this and I'll move it right over here, and we will, God willing, tomorrow to continue with this. So I'm going to stop the share. Any questions about what we did today? Was it pretty clear, I hope? Your silence is deafening.
It was clear. I felt it was clear.
Good. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm just going to stop the recording.